give life, you are love. You bring light to the darkness, you give hope. You restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Sing that with us, church. You give life. You give life. You are love. You bring light to the darkness. You give hope. You restore every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. Church, your voice sounds beautiful this morning. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. Lift up your voices, sing it with us, all the earth. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. Great are you, Lord.
Heavenly Father, we just come before you this morning just so in awe of you. The ability to just sing praises to you this morning is an honor. It's a gift. Lord, no matter what we sound like, God, we pray that whatever we give to you, we give to you with our whole hearts. Lord, please be with the the pastor, as he comes now and he preaches your word, Lord, we pray that we open our ears, we open our hearts to receive it. In your name I pray. Amen. You may be seated.
Well, if you weren't awake, you are now. All right, so let me do a little housekeeping before I jump into our text for today. We, this summer, are going to do something that we haven't done before. We need to renovate this room, this part of the room, not this part. And so we're going to have to move to the middle school this summer to do that. So just kind of put that on your calendar, and in June we'll make more announcements. You know, the question I get a lot of times is, so when are we going to build our new building? Well, the answer to that question is when you have about $15 million. and that's not joking, that's a for real number. So 50,000 square feet is $300 per square foot. So you do the math. So whenever you, I was going to say hit the lottery, but I'm not encouraging you to do that. But if you do, we might could do that. Or if you come into some money some other way. So the plan is the air conditioner in here is the units and stuff are like 20 years old, sound system. So we're going to have to do a lot of work up here. It's going to probably be about $180,000. And so if you want to give to that, you can give to the building fund. And so pray about that, help us to cover that. But we will make a shift this summer and then be back in and celebrate what God's doing for us to be able to meet in this room. And then eventually, Lord willing, we'll, build or see what the next steps are. So with that, that's a little housekeeping. I'll give you more details later. So today, we're in a second part of our series, Arrows, talking about parenting. And so particularly today, let me say this. What we talk about when it comes to parenting, we're talking about relationships. And so in all our relationships, these things are true. So if you are here and maybe you're not parenting, you may get be like, hey, should I just get up and leave? And the answer is no. You need to work on applying this because it does apply to all of our relationships. There's like the general application and then there's specific. I'll go back to a conversation that I had probably 19 years ago. I became the pastor here 19 and a half years ago. And so before I became the pastor here, I was doing student ministry. And when I was younger, I believe that God had called me to work with students. I'd be middle school, high school, and college students the rest of my life. Then through conversations and giftedness and things like that, I began to change the direction a little bit on what I thought God would have me do, which was to be a lead pastor. So I searched and ended up at Grace Point. But in that process, I never viewed myself as a lead pastor. I do now, but I didn't then. So I came to the church, and I was leading here. I was 34 years old, and I was trying to figure things out, and the church was really small. And I went to lunch with a gentleman that was on our church leadership council. And after we got through with lunch, the real conversation began when we drove up to the church. And he is president of a company, just a godly man, and we were sitting in his vehicle, and he said, I want to talk to you about something. And I was like, okay. And so, usually if you go to lunch with somebody like that and then they want to have a conversation with you afterwards, it's like, they're supposed to drop something heavy on you. And so he brought up this in a gentle way. It wasn't like condemning or anything. It was very graceful. He said, I don't think you quite yet understand the role that you have And he said, in particular, I don't think you understand the weight that you carry with people. He said, you're still operating like you have the weight of a student ministries pastor when you need to be thinking of your weight as lead pastor. Not that one's more important than the other, and I don't want you to hear that's what I'm saying. But what he said to me was something that I really needed to learn and embrace. He said, as a lead pastor of the church, your words carry more weight than they did before. And I was like, trying to get that concept, because I always thought, I didn't think of myself in being in youth ministry as a lesser pastor than our lead pastor. Now, I got paid less, but I didn't think of that because I thought, hey, this is a high calling. But so as I was struggling with this, I started thinking about what he said, and I realized that I had underestimated the role that I have in people's lives. I had underestimated the weight that my words carry. I still, at times, have a hard time wrapping my brain around the fact that people actually would care what I'd have to say. And so what I want to say to you is, much like I was having trouble wrapping my mind around being the pastor and how much weight my words would carry, I think a lot of times we as parents don't realize it either. In other words, I think sometimes you and I as parents haven't really thought about the impact of our role and the words that we use with our kids. And that's why we often make mistakes, because we don't spend enough time assessing what it is that we say to our kids and how we say it. So today, I don't want you to underestimate it. Actually, I'm going to try to make you not overestimate it, but I want you to feel the weight of the words that you speak to your children. In particular, there's two things that I want to get at, and that's the text, which is the words that you use, and the tone, how you say the words that you say, because the tone can make a difference. So here's a key thought for today before we read the text. We need to weigh what we say because our words carry weight. We need to weigh what we say because our words carry weight. Like, our words are heavy, our words matter, and they matter to our kids. So there was a study done at the University of Kansas, and the Jayhawks. So they did a study on kids and how they take on and imitate their parents, and particularly in their word usage and their speaking and their conversation. And this is what they discovered, that by the age of 3, that your kids, 86 to 96%, listen to that, that's pretty high, 86 to 96% of their vocabulary is derived from you by the age of 3. That's a lot. So what that means, and they said in this study, is that 4 things to be true. Number 1 is your kids have identical usage of your words. So the way that you use a word is the way they use a word. Secondly, the average number of words you utilize, they tend to utilize the same number of words as they get older. Number 3, the length of their conversations will be similar in terms of volume, equal to what you use in conversation. And lastly, their speech patterns are similar. In other words, if you sound Southern, guess what they're going to sound, right? So our kids imitate us in our words. So what that means is, if you want to know what you sound like, guess who you need to listen to? Your kids. Is that scary? That's scary, isn't it? Guess what that means? When your kid gets off the school bus, or you drop your kid off at school, and your kid walks into the school, and they interact with their friends, their other students, the teachers, guess who they're talking to? They're talking to you. Because your kids are imitating you verbally, through their vocabulary, their patterns of usage, their conversations. And that's like a startling thing. What this means is, if you're a cussing parent, you're going to have cussing kids. Y'all know kids that cuss a lot? I hope not. We're at church, right? Send your kids to Energize. So if your kids are sarcastic, guess what? They didn't get that out of nowhere. So they picked that up from you. Because your words matter. Your conversations matter, and you need to feel the weight of that. Now, why that's important? Because God has made it so that words matter. Do you know the person who cares most about their word is God? And that God never wastes a word that he speaks. Every word that he speaks is on purpose. The prophet Isaiah writes that the words of God do not return void. In other words, God, when he speaks, always has a purpose. If you go back to the very beginning, what is the very first thing that God does? He says in Genesis chapter 1, first recorded words of God is, "Let there be light." In other words, what God says matters to God, and it matters to us. And here's the thing. So when God speaks, he creates. And when God speaks, he shapes. In other words, when God speaks, he knows that he is shaping an environment. When God speaks, he speaks the truth, which is what light is. Let there be light. So when God speaks, darkness covered the earth, and he spoke, "Let there be light." It changed the whole atmosphere. And if you think about that, if God understands how his words impact things, we should too understand how our words impact the atmosphere around us, the people around us. Matter of fact, God became flesh and dwelt among us, Jesus. Do you know that if you read the Gospels really close, you'll see this? What Jesus says matters. And what Jesus does with his words, and think about this, Jesus overcomes disaster. You say, well, how's that? So when his first miracle, when they ran out of wine at the wedding, what did he do? He used his words to make wine out of water. In other words, Jesus' words mattered. So he overcame disaster, he overcame disease, he overcame disability, he overcame demons, he overcame death by speaking these words. And so they're shapers. And so you need to pay attention to the words that you use. Your words have potential for harm or help. Your words can be constructive or they can be destructive. And here's the thing about the gospel. The gospel teaches us that words matter. And the impact of our words is long lasting. And that we should speak in a gospel sense. So the thing that I want to do today is I want to take a broad application, meaning generically to all of us in terms of our communication with other people and what Paul writes. And then we're going to, at the end, make it a narrow application to our kids in particular. Now, the whole thing will be about your kids, but it's a broad statement, and then he narrows it. So when you go to Ephesians, the first half of the book, chapters 1 through 3, are virtually about your belief system. And then the last 3 chapters are about your behavior. And so in other words, Paul's writing and say, this is what the gospel is, and this is the doctrines, and then he says, and this is how to work out, like when you put it into practice, because we want to be orthodox, but we also want to have orthopraxy, which is the right practice. So when we think about this, this is how he's writing. So let me read to you the text that we're going to look at, and then we'll break down this text phrase by phrase. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. Like, this is a powerful passage. And if you want to be a better communicator with anyone, you need to learn this passage. If you want to be a better communicator with your spouse, you learn this passage. If you want to be a better communicator with your kids, you learn this passage. So on the front side, it's going to be what you shouldn't say, and then it's going to talk about, what you should say, and then it's going to talk about how you should say it, when you should say it, all of that. So let's go back to the first phrase. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths. What is corrupting? Corrupting means something is being destroyed. It's being corroded. It's being, moving toward a negativity. So if you were to take this passage from the Greek and what we call transliterate. So you have a translation. The translation is from Greek to English, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths. So if you were to take that and transliterate it, so what you would do, like you would take the language, like I don't know if you realize this, so like if you study Greek or Hebrew, and I'm not like a language scholar, but I know this much. So I have a Bible in my office called the Interlinear Bible. It's not really exciting, but what it is it's the actual like Hebrew writing that we translate and the actual Greek writing, and then it has English words under each word. So for example, like if you're reading Hebrew, you're reading right to left, not left to right. So like you would have to read it backwards, and it feels like really clunky. It's hard to read. Like I don't read out of that because you'd be like, what are you saying? And so if you read the Greek, it's like that, but like the Greek sentence structure is different from the English sentence structure. There's a lot of similarities, but like what's being like the most important part of the text is often put at the front of the sentence. And so if you transliterate this phrase, let me say it like this. It sounds a little bit like Yoda from Star Wars. You know how like he reforms the sentence, and you're like, you have to think about what he's saying. So I want to read to you the transliteration of this phrase. So here's what he would say. So we read it as, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths. Here's what he says. Every word that is corrupt out of your mouth, let it not proceed. Doesn't that sound like Yoda? So every word that is corrupt out of your mouth, let it not proceed. We would say it like this. You need to stop it before you say it. In other words, you need to assess your words before you speak them. And anybody ever said something they wish they didn't say? Yeah. I mean, anybody ever say something to their kids they wish they didn't say? Yeah. I mean, all of us, we all have like I shouldn't have said that. And like, I've done this so much in my life, I just wish I'd have put a stop sign over my mouth, put my hand over my mouth, and just shut my mouth before I let some things out. So he says, in particular, there's a type of wording that you should not use, and that wording is the corruption type words. You should like get a hold of those and shut them down before they come out of your mouth. And so with that in mind, this is a big deal. And the reason we say that is because corrupting words corrupt those who hear them. They have a destructive impact on the person who hears them. And the way I can illustrate this best is some of you as adults, if not all of us, currently, whether you're 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even in your 90s, some of us have heard our parents say some things to us that has corrupted us for generations now, like for decades. And I know this because I do counseling with people, that we are carrying around corruptive thoughts because we had corruptive words spoken to us by our parents. And if I were to have some of you come up right now and give a testimony, you could tell, when my mom said this to me, when my dad said this to me, and you have really never gotten over it. And the enemy uses it, and it's like on a playback in your head all the time. And so if you want to know if words matter, all you have to do is look inside. Because some of us, we hear that playback all the time. I'm a mistake. I'm stupid. I'm an idiot. I'm a loser. Things that we should have never heard that were corrupting. And they are like ghosts to haunt us. And so you can look at your personal experience and see the impact of the words that a father or a mother said to you and go, man, I really need to weigh my words carefully because I don't want corrupting words haunting my kid. I want them to have so much more for it to be better in their life. And so our words can be words that really hurt. But then he says, so these are the words that you don't say, corrupting words. And then he says, but, which is whenever you see a but in the scripture, that means there's a contrast being made. And so he says, so I don't want you to say these type of words, and I only want you to say these type of words. So I want you to move away from and stop the corruptive words, and I want you to have constructive words. So what does he say? He says the next phrase, but only such is good for building up. What is building up? It's constructive. It's oikoidome is the Greek word. It means to build up a home. So when I speak to my child, am I building them up or am I tearing them down? And you have to pay close attention to the words that you use. So what does he say? So don't say these words. Say only these words, the words that are not corrupting. And so we look for words that are constructive. That doesn't mean you don't correct your children. Corrective words are constructive words. But how you use your correctiveness matters. And so we want to be careful not to think, okay, I don't ever correct my kids, because corrective can be constructive. Corrective can be destructive in how you say it. So we need to use the right words. So do you make an assessment of what you need to say with your kids? And here's my advice to you. After doing, my boys are grown. This is my advice. And I would say some of the times I did this and sometimes I didn't. So my assessment is this. You need to assess situations before you ever get in them. In other words, you need to go ahead and think about what you're going to say if this happens, if that happens. Now, recently, with one of my sons, he was facing something I thought could happen. I was already forming what I was going to say to him. So I didn't want to wait till the occasion, to the moment. I wanted to think through it now. So what will you say to your kid when he misses the ball at the game and they lose? What are you going to say to her when she doesn't make the grade? You need to think through it now, not later. What are you going to say when they hit the home run and win the game? What are you going to say to them when they get in trouble at school? What are you going to say when they disobey you? What are you going to say when you mess up in front of them? You need to already be thinking through this. Because if you wait till the moment, you're going to have an increasingly hard time with your own emotions in order to say what you need to say. Because there's some words that you're going to need to stop, and there's some words that you're going to need to start. Now, let me give you an example of this. Let me give you a principle real quick. I think this is important before I tell you this example. My sons love it when I use illustrations that involve them, by the way. I'm being sarcastic. They don't. Your kids don't just hear what you say, they feel what you say. And I would even go so far as to say they more feel than they hear what you say. So if your kids feel what you say and you felt what your parents say, you need to pay close attention to the emotional part of the conversation. Which, by the way, your conversation with your kid is primarily emotional, not logical. So your attempts to use logic with your kid is going to fall short. And if you don't address them emotionally, you're in deep trouble with your kid. Because some of us as parents, we think we're having a logical conversation when it's primarily emotional. Let me give you an example of something that happened in real life with the Watsons years ago. My middle son, Connor, played baseball here at the rec department. I also played travel ball. He's 9 and 10-year-old here, and he's 9 years old, and they get to the end of the season. You know what they do at the end of the season? They pick an all-star team. And he had high hopes of making the all-star team. Well, I was one of the coaches, and so I got involved with that. And guess what? He didn't make the All-Star team at 9 years old. So guess who had the joy of delivering the bad news? None other than the pastor. And so I go into his room and I talk to him. And I don't remember the whole conversation, but the conversation went something like this. Connor, you didn't make the All-Star team. You weren't good enough to make the team this year. He started crying. When I asked why he's crying, this is what he said to me. You said I wasn't a good baseball player. That's not what I said. Logically, that's not what I said. But that's what he felt by what I said and how I said it. You don't get to do redos. And the question would be, like, if you had the moment to do that over, how would you do it? I would say it differently than the way I said it. Because I wasn't telling my son you weren't good enough. I was just saying at this moment, you weren't good enough to make the team. Like, that doesn't mean you won't make it later, but you weren't good enough in that season to make it. So how would I have said it to address him emotionally and constructively? I think I would have said like this. Connor, so I need to tell you something you're not going to want to hear. And what I would have done in that moment was get him ready for bad news. Because when you say that to somebody that way, and you lower your voice like this, you brace them for the moment. And so I would have paused, and then I would have said, addressing him emotionally, I'm afraid you didn't make the All-Star team. I just left it. And then, as you assess the moment, what you have to look at, because, like, did you see the next phrase, as it fits the occasion? So you want to be constructive as it fits the occasion. So what you have to do in your conversation with your kid is assess what you think their emotion's going to be and anticipate it so that you can address it. And so if I could go back to that moment, he cried. I think I would have said, I know you're disappointed. And I'd have left it right there. I wouldn't have said to him, if you'd have went out and practiced more like I told you, you'd have made it. And I wouldn't have said, if it wasn't for all those coaches down there politicking and putting their sons on the team, you'd have made it. Because that's not the issue for him. So what I want to do as his dad, and what you want to do as a parent, is address him emotionally. Because in the moment, he was hurt. He was disappointed. He didn't need me to fix it. He needed me to feel it. And too many times as parents, we're so busy trying to fix it in the moment, we don't ever feel it with them. And what your kid needs from you, just like your spouse needs from you, and everybody needs, they need you to feel it, because your conversations with them are primarily emotional. There will be a time to have more of a logical conversation, but that wasn't the time. And some of us are so caught up with trying to fix our kids in the moments, we don't understand that if we really want to fix it in the moment, we got to feel it. And by feeling it, we start the process of fixing it. Don't get to do it again. And then you just say, I know you're disappointed. You don't have to say anything else. Let them guide you what the conversation should be. It's their emotion. And here's one thing that's pretty startling. So one of the things that I'm big on is learning temperaments of people. If I sit with you for a while, I pretty much can peg what your temperament is, because I've trained myself to assess this. I'm not always 100% right, but I get pretty close. And by temperaments, what I mean are the four major Greek temperaments are choleric. These are not from the Bible, by the way. They're just from psychology. Choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic, melancholy. And everybody in the room has a primary and a secondary. And so we use this with the staff, and some of you do Bible studies here. I would encourage you to learn it. So like, you may not know the words choleric, sanguine, melancholy, phlegmatic, but you may learn it like in our study here at the church. It's green, yellow, blue, and red. Or like if you've done it with animals, it's lion, otter, retriever, and beaver. Or if it's birds, it's eagle, dove, owl, and parrot. So like those, like you may have done some study in that. So here's one thing that's really interesting. If you were to take the population of people and try to figure out what they are. So and this is about how you communicate with people. So 33% of people are sanguines. Well, that would be yellow. That would be the otter or parrot, playful type people. They speak the language of people and fun. Do you know people who speak the language of people and fun? You probably can point out some. Like if you were to take my staff, we got a couple that speak the language of people and fun. Carrie, okay, so she would be one. So all right, so you got that, and then you got about 12% of the population is red, choleric, lions, and eagles. And that would be me, by the way. And so I speak the language of power and control. So there that is. And then about 14% of the people are what we call green, phlegmatic, retriever, or dove. So if I say dove, you think what? Peace. So it's people who pursue peace and harmony. And then 41%, listen to this, are blue, melancholy, beaver, or the owl. And so the phlegmatic and the melancholy, the green and the blue, so that temperament processes stuff inwardly. So in other words, if you try to have a conversation with somebody who has that temperament, they tend to need some space to be able to have that conversation. And I wasn't aware of this when Connor was 9, but if I could go back, I know him now. He is a person who speaks the language of peace and harmony, and he is green. He's a phlegmatic. That's his primary. So like, I was trying to get information out of him that I should have just left, because sometimes for you to feel it is just for you to be there, not to speak a word. And that may be the way that you feel it with them. The point being is, over half of the kids, 55%, they're going to be inward processors. So if you were to take all your kids, if you have multiples, you need to figure out how they're wired. I have 3 sons, and they're all very different. I have a choleric, and I have a melancholy, and I have a phlegmatic. I knew, before I could do that, I knew that they were different, and I parented them differently. And you have to assess your kid. And the reason you do that is because what he says, good for building up is it fits the occasion. Or it could be rendered according to their need, according to the need of the moment. Assess the moment. This means I need to assess who I'm talking to, and I need to assess the situation. So it's the person in the situation. It's the who and the what. That's what I'm paying attention to. This means that I've got to think spiritually about these things. I've got to speak to their emotions, not just their logic. And so let me give you a verse. I love this verse, Proverbs 25:11. A word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. So a word aptly spoken means it's a word given at just the right time, in just the right way, at just the right moment. Like it's just the right word at the right time. You're just using it right. Like the timing's everything. And he says, Solomon writes as he says, so a word aptly spoken needs to fit the occasion. And so when you think about your words and your communication with your kid, it needs to be like apples of gold in settings of silver. What we know about gold and silver is what? It's expensive. It's valuable. So if you think about the way you communicate, what if you thought about it like this? So it's like the words that I use, they are the apples of gold. They're valuable. They weigh a lot. They got a lot of expense to them. So I want to weigh my words so that they're like apples of gold. And then I put them in settings of silver. That means it's the way that I frame what I say. In other words, it's not just the words that I speak, apples of gold, but it's also the frame in which I give them. That means that I got to pay attention to not just what I say, but how I say it, because tone affects everything. And I know that because I'm a person who uses tone a lot with my wife, my kids, my staff. And so I have to be extremely aware of my tones. I mean, my boys knew when I was going my dad voice. And if you can learn and assess the moment that your words are aptly spoken as it fits the occasion, then it can be like apples of gold in settings of silver. So let's talk about that for a second. Remember I said, as we work through this, Paul had a lot to say about this kind of thing. So we can go back just a little bit, so a broad application, then we'll move to really narrow. Ephesians chapter 4, just before he says this, verse 15, he says this: rather, speaking the truth in love. Truth is hard. And some of us are so caught up, well, I'm going to tell them the truth. And truth is hard. And he's not saying don't speak the truth. It's apples. But he's saying use settings of silver. It's love. So it's wrapping up truth with love. Like you speak the truth in love to everyone, and particularly your kids. So let's get to a specific application. Chapter 6, verse 4. Paul addresses fathers. These are Greco-Roman fathers, and the Greco-Roman fathers had authority. And what they said at their home was what went down. And so this is why Paul's addressing them. It doesn't say parents. If the father died, the mother would take that responsibility. So it's really about parenting, but it's particularly given to fathers because fathers in the Greco-Roman world were harsh. And here's what he said to them: fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Contrast, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So that there's corrective and constructive instruction. But he says, do not provoke your children to anger. So when he writes this, he's saying, pay attention to your words. And let me give you kind of what I think we can apply that to. So don't provoke them to anger. What makes your kids angry? The things that you say. You know what I think really probably makes kids angry sometimes? Is the fact that we as parents, and look back on your parents as well, we constantly point out what they do wrong, but we never praise them for what they do right. Sometimes as parents, we're so caught up in pointing out the wrongs, we totally miss the right. Because in the nature of our relationship, you know, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 13, love keeps no record of wrongs, but we're really good at it. Like we see the negative and we see the wrong a lot clearer than we see the right. So what I want to encourage you is if your kid's angry, you need to maybe pay attention to how you're addressing them. Not only that, if you were to take the book of Colossians, chapter 3, verse 21, Colossians is like a mini Ephesians. It's 4 chapters instead of 6, and so it's written of the same outline. And here's what Paul writes to the fathers there. Same type of thing. Fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. That word for discouraged is that you snuff out their passion. You put out their fire. You kill their dreams, so to speak. And so in other words, so when you speak to your kids, don't put out their fire. The provoking here is antagonizing. It's habitual and repetitive insensitivity to your kid. Here's one unique thing about the gospel in the writings of Paul in particular. In virtually every other religion, you don't find really any record of, that I know of, I could be wrong, of fathers told to be sensitive to their kids' emotions. Think about that. Like these two verses, you catch what it said? The two issues are, don't bring your kids to anger and don't snuff out their passion. Don't let them be depressed. So what are those? Anger and depression, what are they? They're emotions. So the gospel should impact us as fathers and as mothers so that it impacts the way that we communicate with our kids, so that our communication is sensitive to how they feel. Because a lot of us go, well, I don't care how he feels. You should. That's what Paul's teaching here. That's what we do with the gospel. That means we have to assess our words and the feelings of our kids. You know, James writes, and I bet y'all have heard this one before, because it's important. If you're going to address their emotions, you got to address yours too. So what does James say? James tells us to be quick about something and slow to a couple things. So he says, be quick to what? Oh, so y'all know this verse? So, be quick to what? Say it loud. Y'all know it. Be quick to, louder, come on. I can't hear you. This is like I'm your kid. Quick to what? Listen. Slow to what? Man, y'all coming on. They got something going on now. Slow to speak. And slow to what? To become angry. Why do you think James wrote that? Be quick to listen to your kids. Feel it. Be slow to anger. Slow to say what you're going to say. Why would you do that? Because you need to assess what it is that you're going to say so you can stop it before you say it. So that you can make sure that it's a word aptly spoken so it fits the occasion. And here's the reason. So Paul gives you the motivation to do it. So here's what he says. That it may give grace to those who hear. So if I were to ask you, what is the opposite of grace? Be not getting grace, which would be what? So grace is something I get that I don't deserve. And so what would be the opposite? It'd be condemnation. So when we speak to our kids, do they hear grace, the gospel, or do they hear condemnation? Your kids are sinners. Mine are too. You know what that means? Your kid's going to mess up. Y'all discovered that yet? Somebody be like, yeah, a lot. Kids are going to mess up. When they mess up, are you safe? Are you a safe person with them? Are you a safe place for them? With what you say to them. When they mess up, what do they need from you? They need to hear what? Grace. Grace. What is grace? Grace is two things scripturally, gospel-wise. Number one, it's forgiveness of sin. They need to know that they're forgiven for their mistakes. I need to know from my Father He forgave me for my mistakes. But grace is not just forgiveness. Grace is empowerment not to stay in your sin. In other words, it needs to be grace that forgives, but it also needs to be grace that empowers and gives them the opportunity and the ability to grow. And that's what we have to be as parents. And that is communicated by the words that we use, the text and the tone in which we use it. I don't have a daughter, but if I did, there's some things that I would say over and over. And I got sons, and I said those things, I believe, over and over. And if you want to get grace into the heart of your son or daughter, there's some things that you need to learn to say. I won't go through everything, but there's some things like, you need to say, I forgive you, and you need to be able to say, please forgive me. Those are hard conversations with your kids. But like if you have a daughter and you want to speak to her on a regular basis and hit her emotionally, then what you would say to her is, I love you. Your daughter's wired in the heart for love. Husbands, love your wives. But he never tells the wives to love their husbands. Because the ladies want to be loved. That doesn't mean the guys don't want to be loved. But it's not that about that for us. So if I had a daughter, man, I would tell her all the time I loved her. That doesn't mean I don't tell the boys I love them. I do tell them that sometimes. And I would tell her all the time that she's beautiful. You got a daughter? Or just try this out with somebody else's kid if you want to. Because I don't have a daughter, so I'll see a little girl and I'll say, you look beautiful today. Man, she just lights up. Grace to those who hear. And like with the boys, now I do know boys. Say to them, I'm proud of you. You killed it, bro. I'm so proud of you. So when God spoke about his son, what did he say? This is my son whom I'm well pleased. Man, you did it. Like there's something in the heart of a guy that does that. And so like for girls it's beauty, for the guys it's strength. And so like, see a guy, I'm like, dude, man, I think your biceps gotten bigger. Like he's like, yeah, And so like it's grace for him because it's like, it's not just, hey, I forgave you kind of grace. It's like, it's a motivational grace. It's like, yeah, And so like, it's how you speak to them. And so you need to speak to them, addressing them emotionally. Like if you think about what I said, like I love you, and you're beautiful, son, I'm proud of you, and dude, you're the strongest dude I've ever seen in my life. That's addressing them not logically but emotionally. That's what you have to do. And if you will remember, the words that you say weigh a ton. Man, they're heavy. And they can be heavy in a positive sense or heavy in a negative sense. We're going to close today. We're not going to ask you to stand and sing. We're going to ask you to sit and listen. I'm a fan of a group called Need to Breathe. And they got a song called Follow Me that Ricky is going to lead us in. And I just want you to listen to the lyrics. And Adrian's going to be with him as well. Adrian, you have a beautiful voice. And so, see there? All right, so this song, I want you to listen to the words. When he was talking about when he wrote this song, he was thinking about his kid the first time he dropped him off at school. And what he was particularly thinking about was something he didn't think he would be thinking about. He thought, when my kid goes to school, my kid's going to mess up. And I think he was thinking about the words that he would use and the way that his kid would feel. And I want you to think about your kids. And I want you to think about the words you use and the person that you are for them. Ricky, it's all yours, brother.
Pick me up and tell me I was good enough. It doesn't matter what I've done. You pull me closer. The highs and lows and in-betweens. You're the one that's there for me when I hurt and when I bleed. You make it better. You make it better. You will always be. You will always be the one that I can call. The safest place to fall for me when I can't stand. You always find the best in me, the diamonds hiding underneath every insecurity that I can't cover, that I can leave them at the door. You never need me to be more than who I am if I am yours, and I am yours now, and I am yours now. You will always be. You will always be the one that I can call. The safest place to fall for me. You will always be. You will always be the one that I can call. The safest place to fall for me when I can't stand.
When you feel a little lost now, and don't remember who you are now, you can run into my arms. You can fall on me. I ain't ever gonna leave you, so don't keep another secret. Hold your tears on a weakness. You can fall on me. When you feel a little lost now, and don't remember who you are now, you can run into my arms. You can fall on me. I ain't never gonna leave you, so don't keep another secret. Hold your tears on a weakness.
You can fall,
You will always be. You will always be the one that I can call. The safest place to fall for me. You will always be. You will always be the one that I can call. The safest place to fall for me when I can't stand. When I can't stand. Church, as we go, like Pastor Chris said, don't forget that the words that we use with our kids, they hold a lot of weight. And I'm not always the best at this, and I can definitely do better. But when we think about that, if we really want to believe it, think about the words that our Father in heaven spoke about us. We're worthy. We matter to Him. And those are the best words that we can ever hear from Him. So as we go this week, be gracious to your kids. We'll see you guys next week.